I was like, hey, who's a good backup plan? Well, there's a guy running for governor, and he's gonna be here. A lot of you probably haven't heard him. He's a doctor. He speaks well. I asked him once, I go, do you shoot firearms? He goes, I carry a Glock, and 300 Blackout's the best ammo out there. I go, yeah, you shoot, yeah. You're good. Would you sponsor universal background checks? No. Would any Republican? Yeah, actually, there are some that would do that. So, Dr. Neil Shah, I met many years ago, and I am so happy you ran, because the way I look at it is, if there's a litmus test, it's right there in that pledge, the Never Again pledge. Do you support this? Is this your monumental? Is this what you believe is a priority? And 3 say no, and 3 say yes. You're one of them. You're a doctor. You're a great businessman and a tactical firearm shooter. So you're a good guy. Get on up here, Dr. Neil Shah.
All right, well, I found out 5 minutes after getting here that I was going to be up here tonight. I'm going to identify as Eric Mortensen. I can do that, right? Very, very tan Eric Mortensen. I'm going to tell you the story of how I ended up holding this microphone. But first, let's all take a deep breath. Okay, you just breathed in 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen. And I bet before you took that breath, you just took that oxygen for granted. I took freedom for granted. 2 years ago, I was sitting in one of these seats over there, and I said, this is fantastic, we gotta fight at the Capitol, we gotta do these things, I'm gonna go back home, go back to my business, cure skin cancer, run a business, okay? I took freedom for granted. In 2020, all of that came crashing down. And you don't realize how fragile it is. You don't realize how clogged up your coronary arteries are until you get on that treadmill and you run up those stairs. And that's what COVID was. It was a stress test for society. It was a stress test for the world and for this country. And so far we're failing. But the bright light of that is that those failures have illuminated what we need to do to grow as a people and to restore our constitutional republic. And that was the freedom that we were all taking for granted. So my parents came here from India 50 years ago in search of a better life, like all of yours. We all came from somewhere at some point. And we came to America because of the promise of America. America's a land of opportunity, not of guarantees. That's not what equality means. It does not mean equity. It means equality. It means you get a chance to run the race, but someone's going to finish first. And it may not be you. So my parents came here for that chance. They came here penniless and absolutely poor. They clearly did not look like everyone else that was around them. They came after the civil rights struggle of the patriots in the 60s, who gave us equality. No guarantees, but opportunity. And so my whole life was growing up in Reagan's America, where it was, well, you're all equally worthless. Okay, so that's what it was in school. That's how my teachers viewed all of us. Okay, we were all equally worthless and we were all miscreants. But we loved America. We said the pledge every day. We learned reading, writing, arithmetic. We learned the good and bad parts of American history. We learned how freedom had been stolen for times. Slavery, Jim Crow laws, the Korematsu decision. If you think the Supreme Court's all that wise, there's a litany of things besides Roe versus Wade that they've done incredibly wrong for a very long time. Freedom was something that I took for granted. And I think maybe I'm not the only one in this room who felt that way. Things were working really well. It was the best time to ever be a human being in the history of being human beings. The poorest Americans were living better than the best kings and queens in the majority of history throughout the entire world. But then it all came crashing down. We didn't realize that the lifeblood of this machine, the grease that kept it moving, was our freedoms. And then they were taken away from us, suddenly. And we stood there and let it happen. And then some people woke up and said, wait a second, what are we doing here? We're letting these tyrants shut down our businesses. We're telling these tyrants, letting them put our kids in masks to play hockey. Anyone have a kid that had to play mask hockey? Yeah. Our daughter, oldest, does competitive gymnastics. Had to wear a mask somehow, still does. To do that. Take it off when he competes, so she runs, drops her mask, does the vault, comes back, puts it on. It's kabuki theater for a disease that killed 10 to 20 healthy children. That's it, 10 to 20. So we let this all happen. And who was there to defend us? We assumed, well, I've elected Republicans, right? I mean, they're supposed to ostensibly stand for freedom. Nope. Nope, you saw how hard that vote was to get passed. You saw how many people were very happy to continue to have all that power in their hands, continue to give it to single tyrant in St. Paul. So I kind of kept going, like all of us, right? We try to survive this lockdowns and adapt to it. It was painful to own a business. I furloughed half my staff. That was my most painful day as a business owner. Anyone that's actually owned a business will tell you, firing someone for something they have not done anything wrong is perhaps the most painful thing you'll ever have to do. You've taken away their ability to feed their family and pay their rent, and it's not their fault. So I furloughed half my staff. I went home and I cried that day, because I didn't know what the future of my business was. Tim Walz banned elective procedures. There is no elective medical procedure, okay? If you go to the doctor, there's something wrong and you're trying to either prevent something from getting worse or fix a problem. And I primarily do skin cancer and reconstructive surgery, so I stayed there and operated. Half my staff was furloughed. People didn't want to come in. We didn't follow what the CDC says was science. We followed actual science, because I'm a trained scientist and I graduated AOA from the U of M. In the beginning, there was a lot of fear about what this was. I mean, we didn't have a lot of great data, and you're certainly not going to trust any data coming out of the country that manufactured this thing. So we, Anthony Fauci funded it. It's true. That's my Fauci. That's my Joe Rogan doing Fauci, actually. It's not very good Fauci. So we put everyone in N95s from the beginning, before the CDC said that was cool, because we always have them around, because it turns out that we do a lot of aerosolizing procedures when we cauterize wounds. Creates this nasty spray, so we've always had N95s around, because I don't want to breathe that in and get cancer in my throat. So we put all our staff into masks. We are about 18 inches away from people's faces when we do these skin cancer surgeries. Some of the reconstructions are 30, 40, 50 minutes long, and they tend to be 70 or older, so we're very close. I didn't want to give anyone COVID. I didn't want to get COVID at the beginning because I didn't know what it was. We managed to not pass it to a single patient. We managed to not have a single staff-to-staff transmission or patient-to-staff transmission, and that record holds to this day, because we followed actual science. Properly fit N95s do work. Cloth masks don't do anything. And it was very clear early on this was an aerosol-based disease. So there was still kind of this room for science and making things work, and then we kind of thought, okay, our kids will get back into school in the fall, because the kids have not only essentially zero risk of getting COVID, but they're not main vectors of spread. They clobber it right away in almost all cases, so they don't really infect anyone around them, so they pose a very low risk. And then the kids went into school in the fall, and we have an 8, 6, and a 5-year-old, and a 4th on the way. And then they were pulled out. Thanks. And then they were pulled out of school. And I remember my son, he's 6, brings home a picture, and then they go back and forth, and this is, of course, everyone's in masks. Brings a picture of his teacher. It's this big gray blob right here. I said, Benno, what's going on? What's your teacher's mouth? Well, that's what my teacher looks like. That's what they've done to our kids. So you have an entire generation of kids now that have lost almost 2 years of development. And at that early stage, when there's essentially zero risk and there's no benefit from the mask, they're developing weird. They're viewing other kids and other teachers as vectors of disease, not friends. They're not learning to make normal connections. The incidence of severe psychiatric disease, this is showing up at the ER with an attempted suicide, is up nearly 40%. Mental health is an all-time low for this entire generation that's been locked in and had their future earnings taken away from them, had their education, their social development taken away from them. So we paid a higher and higher price. And then it became clearer and clearer that no one was going to actually stand up for our freedom. The freedom that I take for granted, many others had. And so when the slate of candidates started to be announced or become clear as to who they were in the spring, I sent Jake one of my very polite emails. F this guy, if he's the best thing we can do, we're effed, and Walz is going to get reelected. Jake writes back, well, maybe you should run for governor. I said, well, maybe I will. And then I thought about it, and then I woke up the next day and I was like, maybe I will. I'd gone to political training. I had some idea of how this process was going to work. things have gotten so bad that ordinary people who have good jobs and kids and just want to go on being Americans have had to get into the ring. How many parents do you know that are finally engaged with their school boards? If we look at bright lines of COVID, how many parents finally opened their backpacks of their kids and looked at what was inside there? Ask, what books are you reading? What are you being taught? Why are you in school for 8 hours a day when I can do all your lessons in 90 minutes? And when you are there, what are you really being taught? What COVID has done, and this will be one of the silver linings to this debate, is that it's woken a lot of people up. It's demonstrated that freedom is not, in fact, free, that we should appreciate the air that we're breathing, and we can't take it for granted, and that we're going to have to fight to maintain the greatest country that humans have ever created in the history of the world. And that fight is going to take effort at every level. So, some of you in here, I know, have committed to running for office. Some of you are newly minted activists. Some of you will donate money to help people get elected. We need all of you involved in some way. Because if we don't all get involved to the best of our abilities, filling the role that we need to play, we will lose our country, and there will not be another country to move to. There will not be another America. This experiment is the only one. And we have to fight like hell to defend it. So I make a lot of phone calls nowadays. That's like my life. I lock myself in the top of my garage, where our kids used to go to Zoom school, and then I make phone calls to people and I beg for money. I become a professional beggar. I was a skin cancer surgeon, now I'm a professional beggar. A lot of the folks that I've talked to have moved out of state. Down in Florida, I'm in South Carolina, Texas, any number of places. And that's tempting. I've certainly had those thoughts. And I think you have too. But the reality is, we have to turn and fight. There's a point where you have to dig in and say, no more. We cannot continue to cede ground to the enemy. We cannot continue to watch our freedoms be destroyed. We have to stand and fight. My wife's family came here from Scandinavia about 120 years ago, something like that, settled in Atwater, been in Minnesota their entire lives. All their descendants. They turned this place into the land we live in today. And our children will turn it into the land that their kids live in tomorrow. And we stand here and we fight to defend this land and keep Minnesota, save this state, and by extension, save our country. And there are thousands and millions of patriots around this nation doing the same thing right now. Whether it's a trucker in New Jersey who took out the sitting state Senate president. Or whether it's concerned moms finally getting elected to represent their children's interests at the school board. We are all finally fighting back. So thank you so much for being here tonight. Your choices make a massive difference in the future of this state and this country. And I'm up here running to save the state that I love, the state that my children will live in, and the state that their children will live in, because I love Minnesota and I love America. And in 2022, all of you have a choice about whether you want to send politicians to St. Paul or whether you want to send statesmen to St. Paul. Thank you. I think we have time for a few questions.
All right.
When is the baby? These guys never listen. These little guys never listen to you. So the baby is due the day before the endorsing convention. I'll be up there with the baby Bjorn, chest feeding my infant.
All right, we've got a question here from Mr. Kirk.
Yes, I've heard that the vaccines are mostly like graphene oxide, contain mercury, aluminum, and that they've killed 150,000 people in the United States so far. Why don't we just make that known to people? It seems so obvious that also, my wife works at Fairview Hospital, and I confronted the directors of the clinic, and I say, just show me a copy of what's in the vaccines, and the first thing they say is, you leave here now, we're going to be arrested for trespassing. I mean, this whole thing is just a complete lie.
Yeah.
I mean, why can't we just make that obvious to people? It seems that, the deaths are just astronomical.
Yeah, I mean, COVID certainly killed a ton. These vaccines have the highest rate of reported deaths of any vaccine. In fact, if there was a vaccine that had 1/100th of the reported deaths in bears, which underreport, the number of actual deaths, it would have been pulled off the market. The bottom line of this entire argument is about health freedom. So we have these vaccines available, they're really kind of more therapeutics, I guess would be a more accurate way to categorize them. And I think there are patients for whom they have net benefit, and there are patients for whom they should not even be entertaining, particularly kids. What I have found the most disturbing around the entire issue is the complete abrogation of choice on your part. And choice involves decisions that people may make that I may not agree with. Okay? So you're free to smoke a cigarette, I'm gonna tell you it's not a good idea, you're still free to do it. And we've lost that in this entire discussion. It's been, you must do this, you must do that. The proper role of government would be to give you choices, give you information, and then allow you to choose. And they can certainly facilitate those things, and I think that would be the proper role of government, not mandate. That's a word that needs to go away. And the one final note that I would add in addition to on this topic is one that very few people are talking about, and it's become a vaccine or nothing messaging at the state and the federal level, and that's wrong. We have therapeutics that, I'll start with the non-controversial ones. Monoclonal antibodies are the most underutilized treatment for this. They're FDA approved for it, they're lifesavers. They should be running in every medical clinic that can deal with anaphylaxis, which is really the only thing you need to worry about running them in. They should be all over the place, there's no giant shortage of them, and yet you need to fill out a Byzantine form at MDH and ask permission to have your doctor even be able to give them to you, and then they need to be at one of only a few centers, which are all big box medical retailers. They're constricting the supply of a life-saving treatment, and this should not be controversial at all. And then beyond that, we should be prescribing fluvoxamine, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, any of the number of old safe drugs that we know help. And this vaccine-only strategy continues to contribute to the deaths of thousands of Minnesotans because Jan Malcolm and Tim Walz are playing political science by saying it's vaccines only. If they really cared about you, they'd say we have vaccines, we have old drugs, we have monoclonal antibodies. If you develop symptoms, please treat. And if you do that, then you won't end up on a vent in the hospital, which I agree is a place you never ever want to end up. So hopefully that answers your question and gives you some perspective on where I'm at.
Thank you, Dr. Shah.
We've talked about the therapeutics and how effective they are, and who ultimately is restricting our access to these therapeutics, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you can, I would say it's I would say two prime drivers. One, the majority of physicians are employed by large corporations that do not allow them to exercise medical freedom. So they're not all faceless automatons. So some of these docs want to do the right thing, but they literally might be staring down sanction or being fired or an inability to feed their family simply for prescribing a drug that's been prescribed 4 billion times and is safer than Tylenol. The other part of it is getting access to the actual drug. So pharmacists, there's been pharmacy scope creep over years where they want to pretend to be physicians. And so they will take any opportunity they can to decide what's better for you and not what someone else wanted. And so if I send a legal prescription for medication, and my specialty writes for ivermectin, or has before this, more than any other specialty, so I know the drug inside out. We use it for scabies, we use it for lice, we use topically for rosacea. And if I send that prescription in, they'll just say I'm not going to fill it. And that on their part would be legal. So that's one way they can restrict it. So you have to know where to go. So compounding pharmacies or certain enlightened pharmacists, will still fill this. Okay. So those are the two main ways.
Okay, it seems like there's multiple people restricting our use of these drugs. Are people dying because of we're not getting access to these drugs?
Yes.
Okay, why the hell are we not suing these people that are restricting our use to a life-saving drug that could save thousands of lives? Why are we allowing this to happen? Why is that not our primary argument? People are dying that don't need to die.
I 100% agree with you.
There was a fellow back here. I want to be fit. In all fairness, I want to make sure I'm getting to the right guy here. We'll come back and visit you, Kathy. All right. Mr. Cool Shirt here has a question.
First of all, I want to thank you for running. Thank you very much. I don't trust our voting machines. I do not trust our voting machines, and I don't think as conservatives we do not control the algorithm, and we don't have a chance. How can we address this?
Okay. So we'll talk about the voting machines. We're fortunate in Minnesota, the majority of, almost all, I think, except for 6 areas, will vote with paper ballots. And they're counted by Scantron machines. That Scantron machine's irrelevant because they still keep the paper ballots. And the machine just allows you to get the number out faster. They're still counted afterwards. So we're in a much better position than the majority of states. I don't think the machine should exist at all because I don't understand what's wrong with paper and Scantron machines because they're 100% auditable. There's no way to hack it. You might lose 5 here or there, but you can't lose 100,000. And this is, any way you laugh at it, they think we're conspiracy theorists for it, but in the Democrat mayoral primary in New York City, all Democrats, 150,000 votes were fat fingered into the wrong column by somebody. And it wasn't until the guy who eventually became the mayor-elect said, whoa, it's 150,000 votes. That's 15% of the total people who voted in that election. We're in the wrong column simply because of a fat finger on a machine. Those machines have no place in our voting, and we're fortunate here in Minnesota that we have very few. Those should go. But if the system was completely impossibly rigged, you wouldn't have what happened in Virginia. So I'm not completely sympathetic to that there's no hope. They won every single seat the whole way down and took control of their state house as well. So it can be done, and it is incumbent on all of you in this room to do 2 things. One, you actually have to show up and vote, and there's no excuses about that. I don't want to hear I'm watching Mike Lindell videos in my basement. You got to show up and vote, okay? 2, you need to poll watch. And if you live in greater Minnesota, you absolutely need to poll watch down here. And that means registering now because there's a lead time to this. Virginia, again, which is what we're trying to replicate, had 90% of their Republican poll watching positions filled. We have to meet or exceed that number or they will find the votes. So, you have to show up and you have to poll watch. If you see something you don't like, you have to challenge it, make sure your application is impeccable. They're looking for any reason to discredit a Republican election judge and put in a city clerk who's going to be biased, and that should not be allowed. It should be one person from both sides. But we have to show up. Again, no excuses. You got to sign up and show up if you're not running for something there which would make it so that you couldn't do it. So you have to show up and you have to poll watch. Please sign up. NMN-GOP does have a kind of a way to walk you through that, so go there, sign up to be a poll watcher. We got out poll watch 7-1 in the last election. Okay, if someone's watching over your shoulder, you're much less likely to cheat. Is that going to eliminate fraud? No. But if we eliminate enough of it, we stand a chance of repeating what happened in Virginia. We really need judges, that's right. So if you don't want to poll watch, you can be a judge, but you have to do something. You have to do one or the other.
Can I speak to the judge thing?
Yeah.
I just did it. I'm a mom of 4, I work full time, if people say they don't have time, 4 hours of online training, 1 day of work.
That's right.
All it takes. I was the token Republican, the token conservative, surrounded by Democrats. So
Yes.
we need people, and it is not that big of a commitment.
If you can watch 600 hours of Mike Lindell videos, you can all watch this.
Thank you, Dr. Shaw.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about the time, guys.
Thank you.